Next up, we have Tim Adrianson from All Aboard Aotearoa. So welcome, Tim, and same thing, 5 minutes and some questions.
Kia ora, kia ora, kia ora. Good to be back in Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland. Wonderful seeing this committee and the city looking absolutely shiny this weekend. Really, the city's made amazing progress over the last couple of years, which is really great to see. Here we go. My story begins actually with grabbing a coffee, and I can tell you Auckland has the best coffee in the world. Yeah, hands down. So I met a friend for a coffee, a friend who also, for those who don't know me, I've worked for quite some time in the transport space in Aotearoa and in Tamaki Makaurau, and I met a friend who also did the same, but stepped away a few years back for their own mental health. And I said, well, I might need to go to the committee and actually present on the diesel ferry procurement. And my friend responded with, they're procuring diesel ferries. And this was the closest approximation to my friend's face that I could find. To a layperson, to somebody who's not following the discussion, the idea that we are purchasing diesel ferries in 2026 just doesn't make any sense. It's confounding, befuddling. To recap quite quickly, for those, in September last year, Auckland Transport did present to the then TRIC committee. The current ferry fleet is very old. That leads to some problems in terms of potentially reliability and safety, and that could mean there are service disruptions, and I'm as big a fan as anyone of maintaining public transport to be as reliable as possible. There wasn't an appropriate strategy in place to replace those ferries, otherwise we wouldn't have run into these problems. And to compensate for that, we're buying essentially cheap and dirty. The answer is we don't necessarily have the funding or the time to procure what we actually want to achieve Auckland's strategic outcomes, so we're getting diesel ferries instead of electric. There's a suggestion alongside that we might sell the diesel ferries in a few years' time, which is, I think, doubtful as a strategic outcome. And quite frankly, the idea that other people want to buy diesel ferries with what's been happening for the price of diesel recently is becoming less and less credible. Or certainly you might be able to sell the diesel ferries. The question is, at what price do you sell the diesel ferries and what loss do we make as a city in terms of investing in those assets? So since approximately a year ago, when the Auckland Transport Board approved the decision to purchase diesel ferries, diesel has roughly doubled in price. We don't know how long that's going to last. Not only that, we've got about 20 days of diesel in the country and on the water, and if we run out of diesel, I can guarantee those ferry services will be the first thing that we'll be looking at cutting, because they simply don't move many people for the amount of fuel that they consume. All that being said, the business case that was initially presented to justify the purchase of new ferries almost certainly does not stack up anymore. In September last year, Auckland Transport, well, the agenda item that they presented included a note that they were revisiting the ferry program business case. I have not been able to find an updated version of that ferry business case. I'm not aware that it has been presented to either the Auckland Transport Board or to this committee or the former committee of councillors, so I can't tell you whether those numbers stack up or not, but I am pretty sure that you cannot tell me whether those numbers stack up or not either. And as decision makers, it's very important that you know what price would we resell those ferries for? What are we paying for them in the first instance, and what loss are we going to make? How much will it cost to run those ferries if we only keep them for 5 years, or if we keep them for 10 years or longer? We don't know how long prices will remain high. We don't know how much money it will cost the city, but I can tell you that at the moment in 2026 diesel prices, it costs about $1 million a year per boat more to run a diesel ferry than it does to run an electric ferry, and that's quite a stark difference. This is a high-level cost estimate based on some of the numbers that are available. So you'd need to get the actual accurate numbers out of Auckland Transport. That's something you could request. But for the 3 diesel ferries we're proposing purchasing, it's $3 million a year more in operating costs that this council needs to come up with and needs to fund, and that we'll keep paying that until we finally replace those ferries with an electric version. So we're going to have to buy the electric ferries at some point, and we're going to keep paying a whole lot of money until we do. So that's really the short and long version of it. I don't think the business case will stack up very well anymore. I think you need to know for yourselves that it does, and that you've seen it, and that you have confidence in the decision that the Auckland Transport Board made a year ago when the situation was quite different. What I would suggest that you do is that somebody takes the initiative to write to Auckland Transport and say, well, just don't sign those contracts just yet until you've got back to us with that new business case. You might consider asking the Minister of Transport to jump in and say, hey, look, things have changed. We could really use just a little bit of money to get some electric ferries. If we're quite honest about it at this point in time, central government has a real interest in demonstrating that they can make some sensible decisions around purchasing boats and ferries, and it's in their own interest this year to make themselves look good for Aucklanders. Request an update on that ferry business case, make sure that you're confident in the decisions that have been made. And I've been talking to private funders and the private sector manufacturing these boats, and they all say they would be quite happy to step up and fund those ferries, actually. The business case for electric ferries steps up really, really well for Auckland. So if funding is the main reason we're not purchasing them, then take the initiative and figure out how else we can fund them, because there is money to be made getting those electric ferries on the water, saving $1 billion a year in diesel costs. I was fortunate enough to get along to the New Zealand Infrastructure Commission's little symposium last week, and Jeff Cooper, very clever man, mentioned this quote. He wasn't talking about the ferries of Auckland specifically, but I wrote the quote down because it applied perfectly. He said, the moment that prices change, capital intentions must also change. The price of diesel has doubled. The business case for ferries does not stack up. I can tell you that offhand without seeing all the numbers. The intention to purchase 3 diesel boats should be revisited, should be reviewed. Kia ora, thank you.
Thanks, Tim. Questions? John?
Yeah, thanks for your presentation, a very interesting one, and certainly I note what you're saying about diesel. Just sort of acting the devil's advocate for a minute, the cost of construction of the electric ferries was significantly more than originally anticipated. Are you drawing any distinction between new diesel ferries, which we were certainly led to believe were far more efficient and not comparable to the older fleet in any shape or form? What you're saying is that if that fuel momentum maintains, then it's not going to be a close race at all. And if so, do you have any comment on the only electric ferry in the Southern Hemisphere that's been operating, the Ikariri in Wellington, which I believe has been an outstanding success in terms of operating costs?
Thank you for the question. First of all, I'd say being led to believe that the ferries are much cleaner might be a little bit misleading. The amount of energy required to push a boat through the water is fairly similar. You get cleaner burning engines, and newer engines are more efficient, but you're talking about marginal efficiency, not a significant increase in fuel consumption efficiency. Again, I would ask Auckland Transport to present those actual figures if that's what they're suggesting to you. I'm not super familiar with the Akureyri ferry's success. I know that it is successful, and I did look for comparable fleets in Australasia to see how they're operating, to see what's happening with electric ferries. And it is Auckland Transport presented and mentioned that we are leaders in this space at the moment, and I would back that. I'd say that is true. We are looking at introducing boats specifically for very high duty cycles in Auckland that is not comparable to anything else running in Australasia right now. So there is an opportunity there to learn before we purchase more ferries. But it does appear as though electric ferries are simply much cheaper to run for fairly obvious reasons, including the Akureyri ferry has very competitive operating costs at present.
Sarah?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your presentation. I have 2 quick questions. One is, you said electric ferries pay for themselves within 10 years. What's the sort of average lifespan of an electric ferry?
Good question, and again, referencing former councillor question, we are in somewhat new territory for running this kind of ferry service and the duty cycles of these ferries, and there is a battery lifespan versus a vessel lifespan difference. The batteries may need replacing after. It really depends how much you run those ferries and how many duty cycles they do. But you could estimate around 15 years looking at similar duty cycles on road freight, trucking and electric vehicles, for instance, which comes with a high capital cost to replace the batteries. But the batteries are recyclable and serve a second life on land, so it's not that they have zero value when they are replaced. And otherwise, the vessel itself, a carbon fiber vessel, you can maintain and look after, similar to our current vessels, 20-25 years. without jumping into too much technical detail, the diesel engines on the current ferries, diesel wears out quite quickly in a marine environment. You end up maintaining and replacing both the engines and the fire suppression systems and other components on a fairly routine basis. That gets more and more expensive. Electric boats likely have a different sort of a lifespan where they are fairly cheap to maintain until they reach an end of life. That could be longer or shorter depending on whether they suffer any sort of real damage during their time on the water. So, but I would estimate 20 to 25 years for an electric boat.
Thank you. And the second question was that your cost estimates around being $1 million a year cheaper to run. Is that based on when all straits are open? Can we assume that in the current time, those estimates of how much more, that you're maybe underselling it a little bit based on the current geopolitical environment?
That's an approximate based on 2020 current diesel prices. Under current diesel prices, it can be as much as $1 million a year cheaper to run, based on the Hobsonville route, which is likely the next most sensible option to electrify in Auckland. If diesel halved in price and came back to what it was in 2024, which was the time when diesel prices were inputting into the business case, then you get half that saving. You get about $500,000, $500,000 a year cheaper to run electric than it is to run diesel. Just quickly, I think it's worth pointing out we're likely to head towards electrification regardless. So at some point, we're going to pay for the landside infrastructure and the electric ferries. So we're kind of paying twice, and then we're also paying for the diesel cost until we actually stump up to pay for the electric ferries in the long term.
So, kia ora. Given the world as it is today, and I don't know how long it's going to be screwed, do you think we've missed a trick in taking, I suppose, advantage of what is going on? Our focus should be to electricity rather than trying to get a can of diesel out of the Straits of Hormuz or wherever.
Kia ora, thank you for the question. I guess the first thing I'd say is we didn't miss a trick when we chose to electrify our railway lines, right? That is really paying off right now. We didn't miss a trick when we chose to invest in electric buses, and the electric bus fleet is actually, that's saving us a lot of money in public transport operations right now. So if we were to procure diesel ferries today, I think, yes, we would be missing a trick, the sensible option. The world is moving towards electric. We know that's the pathway to head down. We know that's the future. It's comparable to investing in a fleet of fax machines or rotary telephones at this point in time. Yeah, I think we would be missing a trick if we were to purchase diesel ferries in 2026. Thank you.
Alf?
Atamari he mana. Atamari e koutou katoa. Tim, I haven't got a question for you, so my humble apologies, but to you, Chair. I just wanted to sort of see whether you were seeking a report back in regards to the decision that was made in November of last year around the diesel. I think it's important that we end up getting it in light of the crisis that has been identified by Tim, and nobody knows when the heck that is going to finish. And we've all seen the rise in petrol costs, but importantly, as Tim has outlined, with diesel. So I just wanted to sort of seek your guidance in just getting a report back to this committee in regards to where we're at with that procurement that we confirmed in November. Kia ora.
Yeah, and I mean, so we endorsed, and I think in September last year, the approach. And so we can probably get something back. I would imagine there's something in there in regards to the Auckland Transport fuel, the response to the fuel crisis. And I guess as part of that report, if we're going to have that report, we would have to understand the limitations and the capabilities of those electric ferries, and potentially which ferry services, if we were going to go electric, basically the electric ferries aren't good enough to that we have at the moment or have getting built. Technology is not good enough for the long haul services that we have to go to Pine Harbour and Whangaparoa, and so that would have to be part of any report. But you know, if you want some information back, Alf, we can get some from AT and in regards to the fuel. But I'd imagine it's be part of.
Yeah, look, if you could, Chair, I mean, and the reason is it's been outlined, but if you read an article that I've just read again in November of last year around the pros and cons of EV and also diesel and everything else, some of those need to be sort of, again, I think, updated for this particular committee. So if a report could come back based on the procurement, based on issues that we're now facing globally, in regards to that, just for us to be aware around this table of your committee, Chair, if that's okay.
No, we can
Kia
do
ora,
that. We can
kapai.
do a bit of crystal ball gazing as to what happens in 6 months with fuel.
And thanks, Tim.
Okay, any other questions? None? Julie?
Kia ora. I'm using the system. Are they not showing up? Because that's the second one that I had to put my hand. Anyway, okay. So my question was primarily what was already answered for Alf, but also there was a request there around a pause on the current procurement, and it would be helpful in terms of the time frame for this, if that is something that is possible or not. So I don't know if Barry or Andy, you have an indication on those. Sorry, Tim.
Yep, so we can't, public input, we cannot have direction setting, in that sort of regard. So, no, we can't move anything to pause. Let's get a report and let's get some information and make an informed decision.
Question was more around the timing of that information and whether that makes a pause possible.
Council, we can try for May, but it might be June. We'll just see. We might be able to get a memo out if we can just pick that one up. And I've got the message about as soon as we can to provide quality information.
Great, thank you.
Probably June, because the May agenda is absolutely chocker and we are trying to shed stuff off it. So, Margie?
Morena tātou. Just in support of Alf and Toe's comments, it makes sense to future-proof. So just wanted to give that comment across.
Okay, any further, Shane?
If we're throwing in comments, I also just want to throw in seeking advice also means timing of procurement decisions. So it's not necessarily just asking them to pause, but when is the decision going to happen? Advice for this committee would be useful.
Okay. John?
Sorry, this is more of a question, but we have the statement of intent on the agenda later. I know we're not adopting it, but my understanding from that is that this committee won't have the decision-making over significant contracts, which is something I raised in an earlier workshop. So my question is, irrespective of timing, are we actually going to be able to have control over contracts like this?
Public transport will be the domain of the Public Transport CCO, and I'm not sure if we've actually got to that point, and we're just working through, I guess, the transformation and where decision-making sits. So, but a CCO has been created to look after public transport. This is a public transport realm.
I understand that. Look, I'll raise it again under the item. It's more appropriate, but I think we're actually stopping ourselves. Thank you.
Okay, no further questions. Someone like to move? Thank Tim. Thank you, Alf. Second. Thanks, Lotu. Those in favour say aye. Aye. And against, carried. Thanks, mate. Thank you. We have no local board input, so the first item up on the main part of the agenda, 8.1, is the Auckland Council